So hopefully you had a chance to print out or to the lecture notes. We'll be going through some information here, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you if you make some notes along the way. All right, so as I mentioned, we're working on something different. We're working on enlarged floor plans, and this is, you'll see what we're going to be doing in the assignment with it. And these are pretty important documents, because if you remember, all the information that you've been putting on the drawings have been at 1/8" scale, and that's pretty basic for tenant improvement drawings, or for many drawings, whether they be commercial, residential, or hospitality, whatever. And as you'll know, the key goal here is to create documents that are correct in content and easy for conveying the information to others. Maybe at this stage, not so much your client, although some clients will want to look at these types of drawings. They probably won't understand them, but they'll want to see them. And so what ends up happening is that they, I'm gonna move this over here. Let me do one other quick little note here. Okay. All right. So as a result, sorry. Okay. So these drawings are important, not just for your bidding processes, but for the construction of the work. And so we need enhanced information. We need, a way to convey the information in an organized way. And one of the problems we run into is we just run out of real estate on the drawings. And so as a result, one of the things that we need to do is create a new set of information, some ways of getting from the 1/8" information to the rest of the detailed construction information that's necessary for the work. So I wanted to kind of diagram this. I think we saw this in the first lecture, and I wanted to kind of return to it. What I want you to observe is that the 1/8" plan is really kind of like a general map. We try to provide some good inventory information and some, I'll say, mile high information about how things are to be constructed. And if the project is pretty simple, we can handle probably about 75. Sorry, looks like I got muted there. Sorry. So these drawings, as we go to from 1/8" to 1/4", it gives us an opportunity to focus our information at a much more detailed level. And let's face it, the drawings that you've done so far at 1/8" have been pretty sparse in terms of real construction information. What they've done is they've provided you with the basic requirements and some very simple room arrangements and dimensioning and inventorying of parts. So as we go to 1/4" plans, they then become a vehicle for other information. So as the information demands and as design criteria increases, we go to a 1/4" plan in that area, and that then provides us a vehicle to go to interior elevations, which then lead us to more detailed information, which might include wall sections, cabinetry sections, and maybe other specialty documents. And then those then become the roadmap to getting to the details. Now, in what we've been doing more recently is kind of jumping ahead with the details, because in the normal process, this would come later in the process of creating the documents. So what we're working with is a way of managing the information from a small scale to a large scale. And as we talked about that first night, from simple information to very detailed information. So as indicated in this diagram, you may have area A, area B, and area C that are highly complicated in design and very rich with material finishes and detailing and all sorts of stuff. Simply can't put that information at an 1/8 inch. So now we go to a 1/4 inch. And that'll lead us to the rest of the class activities that we'll be doing for the remainder of the semester. Okay, so let's talk about these. The real purpose of this is that in order to give real information and make it available to folks, we have to be graphically organized in how we do it. And one of the challenges is that an 1/8 inch, if I started to put as much information as I could at an 1/8 inch around one specific space, the drawing would look like heck. It would be really cluttered, very difficult to read, and all that. So this gives us a way of expanding the drawing so that we have ways of noting things easily and putting the information in an ordered way and all that. So by doing this, we help ourselves significantly in providing information. Okay, so just a quick note, do please mute your mics as we're going through this information. That way everyone doesn't have to hear all the various sounds around your environment there. Okay, so the enlarged floor plans also give us an opportunity to put very specialized information in. That is scale specific. Let's all agree that at an 1/8 inch scale, it's really hard to discern what kind of character you can really impart with your design on the project. So as a result, we use these drawings to as a way of expanding the view and expanding the opportunity to describe the detail or the design requirements and conditions you're trying to provide. It also gives us a better way of managing how we reference and we note the information. So if you'll see in some of the examples that we look at here in the lecture, if we tried to provide as much of this information at the smaller scale, just wouldn't work. Okay. So as a result, we get this opportunity to provide detailed information. We can organize it so it's graphically correct. We have a way of creating a hierarchy for the delineation so that it makes sense. And then we can also add in the implications and applications of furniture, fixture, and equipment so that we see how they work in better relationship to each other. All right, and then another aspect of it is that simply put, some of your information that gets developed at an 1/8 inch is not adequate for plan review. They need all that information that you need to give them for code compliance, and it simply doesn't work very well at a smaller scale. So as a result, we can use this method, and they'll often request this for information that's more intense, especially around areas like food service. The health department is going to be very focused on highly dimensioned and articulated information on these drawings. Other groups, any work for DSA or the Department of State Architect for Public Schools is going to be this way. Hospitals are very, very focused in having much more information than you may normally see in a regular set of documents. So as a result, codes will have their impact. And then the idea is that, these provide us with an opportunity to provide that design intense information. So as we're looking at how we're going to articulate what material goes next to what material, and and how the different parts and pieces come together. It's just easier to do it in this way. As a result, you're going to see these plans and drawings get much bigger in scale. That would include everything from cabinetry, which we'll be doing in a couple weeks, to and actually we'll be starting next week on some of the cabinetry, and then looking at complicated arrangements of function, as well as placement of specific articles and items in the design. So these drawings provide us with this opportunity. We can put all that really critical information, dimensions, notes, details, all that stuff can now occur on a plan in a way that we can understand it much better. So what are we really talking about? Well, as I started to describe, we have a hierarchy of information that occurs. Now, this is a plan that we did for a software firm. And in this plan, they wanted to have some exercise equipment and and they had a lot of outdoor court fields for their software writers to work. They had like a volleyball court and a basketball court, and so they didn't want them coming in smelling all bad from exercising. So what they did is they said, Secor, we need Archetype to do a locker room. Well, so it's kind of interesting. The courts were all out in this area. The exercise room was here, and this was the locker room. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is an 1/8" plan. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And as you really look at it, I mean, if you look in areas over here, it's kind of light, kind of open, and not a lot going on. As you get into some of the office areas, it starts to get a little bit more busy with dimensioning and noting and detailing and all that. But then we come to the locker room, which is going to be what we're going to be discussing here as an example. And we see some graphic representation, but there's no notes or anything. It's kind of like not enough information. Well, what we do is we come in and we put this dashed bubble, we'll call it a bubble, around the area. And then what we do is we say, based on that, we're going to provide some detailed information that is applicable to just this design. Okay, so based on that, we have an enlargement of this right here. Now we had to turn the drawing in 90 degrees. So I'm just going to see if I could go back here a little bit. And it's not going to do it. My slideshow's locked in. Okay, so the plan rotated clockwise or counterclockwise, and so what you'll see is there's a lot more information here than there was on that previous sheet. And this is the kind of information that is needed to construct the plan. And so with this, you're going to see significantly more detailing. All the room names are referenced in detail here. You're going to see detail references, and you're going to see some finish and wall callouts. So as a result, we have a lot of things going on here that simply couldn't fit at an 1/8". And as we drill in deeper, each area that becomes more critical for tolerances and dimensioning and all that, and in detailing, become important. So each of those rooms now has, or each of the shower rooms specifically, gets a call out on how big it is for and how it arranges itself for the specific design that we were intending. And so by doing it this way, I can now draw on very specific details and very specific callouts and dimensions and finishes for the space, which I simply couldn't do at a larger scale. So we went from an 1/8, then from an 1/8 we went to a 1/4, and these drawings are at a 1/2 inch. So they're even larger still. So as as is required by the intensity of design, we go up in scale in response. So what types of rooms do we really apply this to? Well, I think it's important to think about a couple things. One is that spaces, which I will call um, more unique or more specialized to the function of the general space that you're working in, they need to be detailed in a higher way. And so as a result, conference rooms have more functions that typically occur than a regular office. There's audio visual, there's conferencing connections that have to be made, the actual fixtures that go in there in terms of furniture and other related interiors items need to be laid out in a way that makes sense. Break rooms are usually enlarged. Those would be like an employee a dining room or something like that, you know, in where cabinetry comes into play, where there's appliances like microwaves and maybe dishwashers and things like that. And then the idea that the finishes might be significantly different as well. And then media spaces, which might include, you know, conference rooms can include media, but there are special applications where media becomes a big part. For this very same company, we had a customer demonstration room, which had, you know, walls of video or, you know, of flat screens up that could be, you know, merged into one image and all sorts of other things, just so that the client can see how well their systems would be designed with their software. So anyway, as a result, these are the kind of spaces. Are there others? Yes. I would say commercial kitchens will need to be enlarged. Probably all your restrooms and toilet rooms will need to be enlarged just because of the stuff and the dimensioning required in them. So these are just some applications. Okay, so as I mentioned, other code places, we saw the shower rooms in the previous slides. Toilet rooms typically have that requirement, food service. Wherever we're doing stairs, ramps, and other ways of entering the building, we want those enlarged also because there's a lot of critical dimensioning that occurs with them that simply can't be done at an 1/8 inch. Specialty spaces, those who get involved in hospitality will understand the need for drawings to be enlarged for more information. In the slide here, this is just a basic conference room or a breakout room in a hotel, but all these walls here are demountable and they have to be uh, articulated in such a way that they can be stacked back into other areas of the space, and so this can become a large banquet room or a large ballroom. So the flexibility of these spaces often comes into play, and all the supporting rooms that get put in to support these functions are also necessary for that kind of plan. Okay, so what are we dealing with when we're looking um, at what the designer's really dealing with here? So the same risks that we've been talking about in terms of making sure the information is correct, that we understand the existing conditions and what's actually changing. You might want to go ahead and take a look back at lesson 3 or, you know, module 3 for some of that information. But we really want to capture what the client's very specific uses and functions are and make sure that we've got them accommodated on a plan. And that plan will then allow us to provide all the necessary references, details, and notes. When we fail to do that or when we miss pieces in that is when we get in trouble. And so the idea of an enlarged plan actually does help us mitigate risk associated with complicated projects. Okay, so these drawings really represent larger scale information. They give us an opportunity for the dimensioning, the referencing and notes. They provide us with an opportunity to think about the construction of the space from the sense of what's happening above and below at a much better description than we would get if we were just keeping it at small scale. As mentioned, the cabinetry finishes, all these elements come to play and become an opportunity to describe our designs in a much more organized and thorough way. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and we're going to look at what's involved in these drawings. So we're returning to this locker room arrangement. We have a locker room for the men's and a locker room for the women's. And basically, it's hard to see it here. You may have to go back to the 1/8 inch to see all the simplicity of the information that was provided. But okay, so we enter from this direction. On either one, we have a lab area here. We have water closets provided and urinals and water closets in the men's. Then we have locker areas, and then we have all the shower areas for each of the rooms. And one of the things that we start to look at here is that how do the spaces lay out and all that. For example, from many years ago when I was a younger architect, I did a lot of health clubs, and I learned how important it was to make sure that we had lockers that were within walking distance, easy, I'll call it line of drip from the showers that wouldn't track through the rest of the locker room, because those who might just want to come in and change their shoes and clothes for some basketball don't want to be tracking through all the water and stuff. So here's what's involved here. We have, as I mentioned, we have the lockers provided here. We have a change area here in case folks needed to iron their clothes and do things like that for a meeting. There's a towel drop here, and then each of the shower rooms were separate compartments. There's no gang shower here. And in so doing, we have the disabled access shower here and over here. And in doing that, we have an opportunity to see, just where things are. So we have the towel drop here. This is where the towels get stacked. So the clean stuff is here. There's a cabinet down below, and they get replenished by the service that maintains the locker rooms, and they come in, twice a day to make sure everything's operationally correct. But you can see, just look at all the dimensions and all the things and how to organize them. What I wanted you to take out of this is, though, while there's a lot of information, we tried to order it in such a way that we keep the dimensions clean without graphic conflict with crossing lines and a variety of other graphic conflicts. Now, do we have it perfect? No, but we tried to simplify it. Here we have an area that's been X'd out for flow. See, this is a floor drain, so we're indicating that we want, with these arrows here and here and here, that we want all the water to be shed to the floor drain and not have an opportunity to, spread out beyond those areas. But by putting that graphic representation of slope and where the slope breaks, we end up with small inconsistencies dimensioning. We just have to go back through and make sure that it's not going through the number, or that if we're doing it, we're trying to isolate it from other graphic conflicts. Now, you may observe some of these references here. These are clouds. Clouds are what we provide contractors when we make a change to information, whether the client has requested it or whether the building department or inspector has requested it. These drawings get updated to include clouding. And when we cloud information, it's a way for the contractor to quickly go to that information and say, oh, that changed, I need to make a note of it. So these drawings have a kind of a dynamic aspect to them. And what you'll observe is that everywhere there's a cloud, there's a delta, there's a triangle, and this one's delta 2. And then Delta 2, there's a whole list of information that goes with them. We try to provide these project revisions in groups. So if there's 3 or 4 things, then we would try to pick them up with that. In a similar way, the towel drop here needed to be redesigned to include an opening in the top, which was high enough that they could put a rollout towel drop kind of a container, and they would just roll it out of the space and put an empty underneath it. But as you look at it, what you're going to see is there's another delta here. And if I'm looking at it, it's a delta 3. So that's another revision that happens. So sometimes drawings or projects change as we're working on them, and this is the way we keep track of it. So hopefully you'll see all the things that are going on here. It's a rather complicated drawing, but it gets even more interesting because as we go deeper in, we start to see what each of these shower stalls needs to do. Now, when we do these, we are actually going to be coming in and putting interior elevations here, here, and a variety of other locations. Now, this isn't the typical sign that we would use for that. When we came up with this, we had so many spaces, it became difficult to use a typical sign. So we used a sub symbol that we used here for these interior elevations. But these would then indicate that we have elevated this wall and this wall for the code official to understand what was going on. And we've given that reference up here so others will understand that a little better. So again, we started at an 1/8 inch. Then in the last drawing, we were at a 1/4 inch. And here we're at a 1/2 inch. So we get bigger as the demand requires for more information about the drawing. Okay, so how do we go about building this information? This is something that is a pattern. Hopefully you'll see it. As a design professional, someone putting this information together, I want to review the information that was taken at the beginning to flag anything that might be required for specialty drawings that would include enlarged plans. I would then want to review the space plan that the designer did, and so that we would understand what their goals were. Then what we would want to do is look at the plans. Now, I will say this plan is a little bit different than the one that you're working on today. I think the assignment ones will give you some more information on that. But basically, as we're looking at the plan, we're looking at spaces where enlargements are necessary. And at an 1/8 inch, there's just too much information. So we would identify this area in the break room as being likely locations for an enlargement. And then we would indicate which ones we were going to do. Now, in this particular case, these washrooms were existing. We didn't need to go back and redocument them, but all this was a new break room, and so it needed to be enlarged so that we could find out what was really going on there. So we draw the bubble around it and we reference that, and so they know where to find that next sheet of information. So we take that and then we drop it onto the plan. And then we have some standard symbols that we use for a variety of different finish callouts and other information that's important to the design. And then we apply those to the base enlarged plan drawing. From there, I'm blowing this up a little bit, we often put in the furniture so we see where the designer had intended that to be placed. And it may also include appliances. There was a refrigerator that was going to be provided and a dishwasher underneath. So those are placed in the plan as necessary. Then we provide the dimensioning that needs to be applied to the specialty construction soon to follow. After that, we provide any doors, electrical, finish, and detail information. So what you'll observe here now is that we've taken and put the floor grid in. These are 12 by 12 tiles for the simple reason that the client wanted a very specific pattern in that room. And so we identify what the field color is for the floor, and we pick out the two accents, and they're colored in with different field colors so that the contractor can see the pattern that we want to have and the approximate placement. So, we will actually, in some cases, measure over 1-2 tiles, start the pattern here, and then come down 1.5 tiles to here. So we can be very specific at this scale about how and where we want these patterns to start. Then we're going to come over and provide information that has to do with specific finishes, and there they are right there. So the floor finishes are called out here, they're referenced here, and then you can see by symbol and by color, they're provided there. You can see we've made the call out down here, and we've said that they're typical unless noted otherwise. Okay, and then here's the typical symbol that we would use for those. We have, if you'll remember from previous course information, that the symbol for interior elevations, which will occur next week, are referenced where the symbol is placed on the plan, and A, B, C, and D are provided as the designated elevation wall. And so other things that might be important, this is a cabinet. It's actually a trash enclosure that it was easier to call out and do in a detail than it was to put it on this plan. It was just too much information. And the stuff over here where all the fire risers is where the fire sprinkler stuff was. So we had to provide an enclosure, and that was provided there. So in this, we have dimensioning, we have noting, we have detailing, and it's all pretty ordered. There's not a lot of conflict. So you need to try to pay attention to how things are placed and look for conflicts, because if a contractor can't read the drawing, he's like to get it wrong, and he'll use the drawings as his excuse for not doing a good job with the design. Okay, so now that we've got all that information in, like I said, we're going to provide some notations and specialty information that might be specific to the room, that may be helpful for the contractor, and it confirms for the owner other things that may need to occur. And that's what I have to say about that.